Serikali ya Kenya Kwanza iko na ukora mingi sana.
We are challenging the Kenya Kwanza regime to come out and tell Kenyans whether it has done away with the free primary and free secondary education. Because from the look of things, this seems to be the case. We are calling on teachers and parents to stop struggling in fear and to speak out boldly for our children whose future is being stolen by this regime.
Sisi kama waliotumwa na wale waliotupigia kura, tukiona mambo hayaendi vizuri, si vizuri tunyamaze. Serikali ya Kenya Kwanza iko na ukora mingi sana. Pesa ambazo zingetumwa kwa muda unaofaa na zote ndio walimu katika shule watekeleze mambo ambayo yanatakana kutekelezwa shuleni, hizo pesa hazikuji vilivyo. Ikikuja inakuja kama Panadol, unapewa tu kidogo, uko prescribed. Sasa hata hapo headmaster, walimu, utafunzaje? Na saa zingine unataka hata practicals, vitu za kutumia, utatumia mdomo na theory uchore watoto wengine mpaka aone na macho ndio aelewe. Mtoto kwa shule kama hana mwalimu mwenye ako motivated, ina end up kupeana bad results. Na unapata saa zingine quality assurance officers wanaenda kwa mashule zingine terrorize hao walimu kwa sababu hawaja perform vizuri. But chanzo cha kuto perform vizuri ya hawa wanafunzi wote Kenya nzima ni hii poor management huku juu kwa government. Tunaomba sana wawachilie pesa yote so that headmasters na walimu waweze kufunza na kununua bidhaa zenye zinahitajika on time. Na what they are doing, wamerudisha mzigo kwa wazazi. Juu sasa sahi kama mwalimu mkuu anataka afunge shule mapema, si kwa sababu ilitakana afunge shule mapema, ni kwa sababu hakuna vile ata drive shule. So everything that the school is needing, sahi wa Kongo kutuma tu watoto, wazazi walete. Mzigo imerudi kwa mzazi. Mzazi yako overtaxed, huku bado anaambiwa leta ndio shule tuweze kurun, ama watoto wakae nyumbani. So are we truly in this country and celebrating matunda ya uhuru? Walimu wanatuma watoto kama ni kuku inatakana ikuwa operated kwa laboratory. Wanatuma watoto waende nyumbani kuleta. Ndio hiyo lesson ifunzwe. Na mboga kwa jikoni kama hakuna, kila mzazi anaambiwa alete sukuma ama alete kunde. Ndio watoto wapate lishe ya lunch time. Because hii food program government inasema tu kuna food program, but which schools are receiving food? Because I know very well kuna constituencies kadhaa zile zimeteuliwa zinapata chakula, watoto wao wanakula free lunch kila siku. Lakini shule mingi ukikuja kule Western, hakuna shule ambazo zimepewa free lunch program. So tunahitaji serikali ikuje peupe, waandike kwa hata magazeti na watusomee Western Province mashule gani zimepata hiyo chakula na pesa wamerelease ngapi. Waache tu kudanganya ati tumerelease ngapi. Kwa sababu unaweza kuwa unahitaji kunipa mimi 1 billion, lakini umewachilia 50 million na unadanganya ati si amepewa pesa. So wapewe shule zote zipewe pesa yenye nitakana according to number of children in that school, ndio walimu waweze kurun the school smoothly. Wamekuwa wanachelewesha tu. Unajua shida si ati kuachilia kidogo kidogo. Shida ni vile mwalimu yeyote anajipanga kufunza. Inamaanisha wakiwachilia asilimia kidogo kidogo hivyo, kama huyu mwalimu angefunza hii kitu term 1 na haijapatikana, ata postpone hiyo lesson afunze siku ingine, maybe another term. And that term has also other units or lessons ama kwa hiyo subject kuna vile amejiprogram. Kuna kitu inaitwa termly whatever scheme of work wanaendanga nayo. So wewe huwezi ambia mwalimu saa hii haziko hii subject utasomesha third term, na third term pia iko na lessons zake. So hiyo ndio wanafanya walimu wanachanganyikiwa, na inabidi walimu waanze kuongezea school fees kinjaro kwa mambo ingine. Wanaweza iita jina ile wanataka kuita. So unasikia tu walimu, wazazi wameambiwa watoe 2,200 kwa kila mtoto, so that mwalimu aweze kutekeleza chenye angetekeleza hiyo term. Tena kama ni borders wameongeza pesa mingi so that some of that money itumike kutekeleza mambo mengine. Na hiyo shida ya mzigo mzazi amepewa ni government imefanya. CBC is a good idea lakini implemented at the wrong time. CBC inatendeka kwa developed nations kwa sababu wako na equipments, learning resources. Ukiingia kwa darasa, it's at their disposal. Sisi hatuna, hata watoto wengine bado wanakaa kwa desk yenye ni mbao yenye imechongwa tu, then ukiangalia kwa classroom, learning resources are rare. So creativity yenye inahitajika kwa CBC in Kenya bado tuko mbali sana. Wange prepare proper classrooms na resources zikuwe za kutosha na wa introduce CBC. But kukimbilia tu the idea but hawana mbinu na means, hiyo ni pigo katika Kenyan education sector. Yeah, we don't have learning resources and equipments to run CBC. CBC ni practicals 90%, 10% theory. Sio kama hii 844 ilikuwa unajua vile unajipanga kama mwalimu. Yeah. Unajua hata ukilipa through e-citizen na management iko na cracks. What we need ni watu kusil kwanza corruption completely. E-citizen mbona wanaforceisha tu, lazima wazazi wapitisha hapo. Unajua wazazi wakilipa fees directly vile wamelipanga, hata government ikichelewesha kutop up vile huwa inafanya, mwalimu bado atarun shule. Lakini ukiblock ile yenye inasaidia shule kurani huku na huku unachelewesha pia, sioni anything hapo. E-citizen is a con, it's a con na Kenyans watakuja kuona. Kuna mtu hapo kwa e-citizen mwenye ana 40% shares mwenye anajua chenye anafanya. Hiyo ni biashara ya mtu.
Most times it never gets done, and when it is done it is never sufficient. It's a vicious cycle really. Even if it were to be actualized, what the ministry announced yesterday would still amount to a mere 25% of money which is due to schools. Unfortunately, these funds are coming too little, too late. Whenever the ministry announces the funds or the release of the funds, suppliers flood schools, students make demands, and PTAs assume all is well, regardless of how small the amount released is or whether it actually ever gets released. The Ministry of Education is running the critical sector by setting up principals, school heads, and managers for failure, and then lying to learners and parents. This must stop. We are here to call out the government on the lies that have now crippled schools and exposed otherwise innocent principals, head teachers, and school managers to the wrath of parents and learners who buy into government lies that funds have been released to schools and other learning institutions. The casualty is none other than the millions of Kenyan learners who are staring at bleak future. To say that schools are struggling because of acute financial problems is a serious understatement. Currently, the Kenya Kwanza administration owes close to Kenya shillings 52.8 billion in free-day secondary school fund, dating back to the year 2021. This is testament enough to the lack of commitment by the government to the future of this country's school-going children. Funds are yet to be remitted to schools for Form 1 students in secondary schools, whose first term is set to come to an end in a matter of weeks, in fact 2 weeks, from what I gather. Equally, there is neither any commitment nor indication from the government that when schools reopen for second term, the monies will have been disbursed. It is nothing short of a miracle, really, that the schools are open and running. However, the miracle is short-lived, since school administrators are running out of tricks to convince suppliers to keep supplying food items and learning materials to their schools. Feeding the students is an uphill task for the school administrators, and for some schools it is just a matter of time before there is student unrest due to hunger. We had the PS lament that this capitation money is not meant for feeding children or pupils. Well, he must be made to understand that there's a ripple effect. when you don't release capitation money, it affects every other school program. Okay? Directly or indirectly. In a bid to make ends meet, some schools have resorted to either increasing boarding fees, food rationing, or changing the students' menu altogether to make ends meet. The situation is dire, as for the first time since 2005, parents have been left with no choice but to buy exercise books for their children. Further, a number of schools are contemplating closing school earlier than scheduled and doing away with end-of-term tests because they can no longer afford basics like stationery. Some school administrators admit that they are forced to play hide and seek with school suppliers who are constantly and rightfully so demanding payments from these schools. In other cases, schools have resorted to slashing budget for extracurricular activities. It is as pathetic as it is chaotic. The present state of affairs in our schools is a great shame to this nation. The net effect of all current ongoings is that schools will resort to provision of compromised basic education, which will have incalculable ramifications on the standards of education in Kenya and the future of Kenyan children. In fact, the impact of this unfortunate turn of events is already being felt across the country in the form of mass failures. In last year's KCSE, for instance, over 49,000 candidates scored grade E. As you know, grade E is normally scored between marks of 0 to 5. This trend of increasing failure rates in high school has persisted for the last 3 years, with the 2023 being the worst performed KCSE examination in the recent past. The ministry is silent about this because they know poor funding is a key contributor to such mass failures. Amid all the chaos in the education sector, the government is still not transparent about this matter and has resorted to open lies on the matter. In the current financial year, schools have only received a paltry Kenya shillings 7,300 out of the required Kenya shillings 22,200 per learner per annum. Other school officials say the figure disbursed is as low as 3,800 per learner. In any event, whatever the figure, it is way lower than the stipulated Kenya shillings 22,200. Given the foregoing, we demand that the government immediately stops the lies and releases the entire Kenya shillings 52.8 billion owed to schools. On the one hand, the government must also embark on timely disbursement of capitation funds, with the payment schedule made public to learners. On the other hand, the Ministry of Education must immediately cease the habit of withholding part of the school capitation without good reason. As a matter of fact, the current capitation amount was arrived at way back in 2017 and must therefore be adjusted upwards to take into account the rising inflation rate. We are challenging the Kenya Kwanza regime to come out and tell Kenyans whether it has done away with the free primary and free secondary education, because from the look of things, this seems to be the case. We are calling on teachers and parents to stop struggling in fear and to speak out boldly for our children, whose future is being stolen by this regime. Neither parents nor the head teachers should cover up for the government. Let it be known to all and sundry that things are not working in the education sector. School heads have run out of ideas to run schools without money, and parents cannot afford the monies that they were in fact promised that the government would cater for. The Kenya Kwanza must own up to the mess that is in the education sector and do what is right for our children and our hardworking teachers. So that's basically the end of the statement. And it is self-explanatory that if nothing is done urgently, we are likely to see a crisis of monumental proportions, not only in our high schools, but in the entire education sector, that something is not adding up. The government continues to promise release of capitation funds and which funds never get to schools. What is happening between the promise and the National Treasury is something that is beyond our imagination. So,
yeah, I think the statement is self-explanatory. I'll only be very brief. If you look at the schedules, the agreement is term 1 you release 50%, term 2 you release 30%, term 3 you do 20%. That's normally the agreement in terms of how you release the resources. And I think the challenges we are facing as a country is a situation where the government is not able to adhere to those agreed targets with the principles. As the leader said, any country which plays around with the education sector plays around with their future. So what we are seeing as leaders is a situation whereby today we have all done very well, and everybody in this room can agree with me, but our children, I actually sympathize with those Kenyans who have not children in the CBSC curriculum. And I'm sure majority of you, when I look at you, you're in that category. That what is going to happen is 10 years to come or 15 years to come, we'll start now facing challenges as a result of what is happening today in our education sector. So it is very important that the government adheres to the agreement with the principals or the stakeholders. And the other important bit which we need to look at as a country is the situation of prioritization in terms of release of money. Because if you analyze what is being released by Treasury, many of the other sectors are getting their money in time. So it just tells you how much, in terms of value, this government values the education sector. We all know it takes the lion's share of the budget, but it is very important that the funds are released to our schools so that our children get quality education. Otherwise, we will all be lamenting in about 10 years' time to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
no, there are mistakes here. I'll send the photocopies shortly, in 5 minutes. Hey, I saw you talking in Swahili. Hey.